everybody, it's Sarah, and today I'm here with a series review, and that review is, as you might see right here, because I'm too lazy to hold it up, the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Cogman. I recently finished the latest book in the series at the beginning of May. It is not the last book of the series, but I thought since I have read all the books that are so far out, I might as well talk a little bit about it and share my thoughts on it and share whether or not I think this series is worth picking up. This series currently consists of 6 books, the first book being The Invisible Library, then The Masked City, then The Burning Page, The Lost Plot, The Mortal Word, and The Secret Chapter. The 7th book is called The Dark Archive, and it's going to be published, I think, in November or December of this year. I do not know if The Dark Archive is intended to be the last book in the series. I do not think so, but I do not want to give any definitive answers on that. I gave all of the books in this series between 3 and 4.5 stars, but before I get into my thoughts, into the negatives, the positives, and everything in between, let me just summarize it very quickly. Although I guess it won't be that quickly, because I do want to go into a little bit more depth than just the summaries that I did during most of the wrap-ups where I talked about those books. The Invisible Library series is set in a world where there's multiple hundreds or thousands of different alternate universes of our world. And each of those universes has its own alternate history as well. So you kind of get some worlds that are still set sometime in the past with maybe a whole different history where, I don't know, China is the big power during the 19th century and not Great Britain, and so on. And then you also get some worlds that are set sometime in the future. Another thing that each of the worlds has on its own is that each of the worlds is kind of set somewhere on the spectrum between order and chaos. A high chaos world often meaning that there's magical creatures and magic existing in that world, and high order often meaning that that world is very high technology. However, it is not good for the humans living in that world if the world is too high order or too high chaos. And this is where the Invisible Library comes in. Because the Invisible Library has the job to kind of keep all the worlds in balance. And the way they do that is they steal to a world unique books and bring them to the Invisible Library, and through that they can forge a bond with that world, and that helps that world stay in balance and stay stable. Our main character in the series is Irene Winters, who is a junior librarian, and so she's one of the people who has the job to constantly leave the library, go to those different worlds and steal books, and then of course bring them back. And so in each of the books we follow her as she goes and steals a different book. Mostly. There are of course some overarching story elements, but mostly each of the books is its own contained story, and it's kind of written in a serialized way. The last thing that might be interesting to know about the series is that there's also the existence of dragons and fae, dragons being affiliated with order and fae being affiliated with chaos, and that brings a whole other, because of course they don't get along, that brings in a whole political element as well that I found very interesting in these books. So now that we have kind of the basics of what this series is about, let me talk first about my negative thoughts, because I like starting with the negatives so that I can then end on positive stuff. The first thing that kind of comes to mind is that in between I would say the series kind of dragged, even though the books are quite short. Most of the books are somewhere between 300 and 400 pages, so not that long. But because they are serialized, it can get kind of repetitive in a way, because the basic plot usually is pretty similar, because you always have Irene who kind of gets the job to steal something, and then she just deals with different things on the way, and it's just the things she deals with that are different, but just simply the plot of her going and stealing something is always the same. And then the second thing that is not like, it's positive and negative, but the second thing that I just off the top of my head didn't enjoy too much, while I also did enjoy it a lot, is the romance in this book. Because it's very low-key, and at parts it can seem so low-key that when it comes, it kind of seems a little bit out of nowhere because there's not really that much setup. There's just simple hints to it, but like you don't really feel the chemistry between the two characters in the first few books until the romance starts. So it's just hinted at, but not in a way where it's shown, but just like said. And that's something that I wasn't too much of a fan of. However, as soon as the romance starts, I do like it, and I will go to that in a later point. So usually here I have a part where I kind of talk about neutral stuff, about stuff where I'm just like, this is how this book was, you might enjoy it, you might not enjoy it, but I don't really have anything to say in this part, so I'm just going to move right on to the positive, because usually what I talk about here is also the writing style, but I don't really have anything specific to say about the writing style in this series, to be honest, so I'm just gonna leave it. And now on to the positives. The main positive thing that I love about this series is, to be honest, the concept. I absolutely love the concept of the alternate worlds, not just because you get a different setting in that series. Because of that, in the first book you have Victorian London, in the second book you have Venice during the carnival. Then I think in the last plot you have 20s America. In the fifth book you have Paris at some point, I don't remember. And in the last book, which of course is my favorite, you have 21st century Vienna. So you get a lot of different time periods, you get a lot of different settings. And the nice thing is, because this is set in alternate universes, the time periods, the settings don't have to be historically accurate because it's an alternate universe. Like, there's suddenly magic in that universe, and that universe is a bit more steampunk than Victorian England would be, and so on. And I really, really enjoyed that. The second thing I love about the concept is the magic system. I found the magic system to be absolutely fascinating because it's kind of a twist on the whole thing of, if you know a thing's true name, then you can manipulate it. However, only Irene and other librarians are able to do that, and I really love that. I also loved what they did with Fae, because the Fae in this world have the concept, because they're so high chaos, they kind of look for an archetype they want to be, and they then personify that archetype. And there's a Fae that's the archetype of the princess, and so she's really powerful, and so people around her just have to love her because she's the princess, and people just randomly seem to save her and nothing bad ever seems to happen to her. And I absolutely love that concept, that playing with archetypes, because you can use a lot of tropes in this book because of that, but it's kind of like with a wink that they're used, and it's like, yeah, of course this is happening because we're in a high chaos world right now, and I'm like surrounded by people of this and that archetype, and so of course this is what's happening to me now, and why did I think anything else would happen? And so I absolutely love that. So I think the concept definitely is the strong point of this series, and it's also something that's then quite fun. It doesn't happen to the main characters as much, but a lot of the side characters that are Fae have certain archetypes, and it's always quite fun in my opinion when they appear, and you just kind of get to see Genevieve Cogman play with those archetypes. Next, the romance. First of all, the thing I appreciate about the way romance is handled in this book is that there is very much a conversation about consent. Because there is this thing between Irene and the apprentice she has, who is one of the other kind of main side characters, kind of having a thing for each other, but Irene constantly being like, no, I do not want to do this, I do not want to go there because I am your superior. I do not care if you say that you're okay with it, because I'm your superior, there is a power imbalance there, and I do not want to take advantage of that. And I really appreciated that. I also really appreciated the romance once the kind of slow burn was over, that it didn't take over. It didn't take over the relationship between the characters, and it didn't take over the story as a whole. The romance as a whole in the series is very low-key. So if you want a prominent romance in your series, in your books, this series might not be for you. But the thing that I appreciated the most is that the relationship between the characters doesn't suddenly change because they're in a relationship. They don't suddenly become overly romantic with each other, but they still show how much they care for each other nevertheless. And I just really, really appreciated this non-romanticized version of a romance and not over-the-top version of a romance. The thing I also really appreciate is that Irene is bisexual. And I loved it. I love the way it was handled in this series, because Irene's love interest is male in the series. However, it's not dealt with in a way where it takes away from her bisexuality. Her sexuality really doesn't play a big role at all in the series. You kind of just notice hints that she's bisexual by her talking about past liaisons with girls or women, and by the way she kind of describes other women as being attractive and so on, but it's never specifically said that she's bisexual. However, I still don't feel that the fact that it's not said and that the fact that she ends up with a guy takes away from her sexuality. And I absolutely love that, because I feel like we kind of have this stigma a lot of the times around bisexuality, that bisexuality in real life, but also even more in books, is only valid if a woman ends up with a woman, and if it's like sapphic bisexuality. And I just kind of get annoyed at that, and personally that's one of the reasons why I don't feel seen a lot and why I don't relate a lot to bisexual characters in books. But I absolutely love the way it was handled in this series. And just also, it's not a series where I would say, oh my god, it's so great with representation, there's so much representation, whatever. But there is just a very nonchalant, kind of low-key way this series talks about LGBT people. For example, there's also a trans character in this series who is a dragon, and the way that was handled is just that dragon society handles gender a lot differently than humans do, and why the fuck do humans have so many hang-ups over gender, and you just all need to calm down a bit. And I just loved the way this was handled. So like, I would love if there was a little bit more prominent representation and like more main character representation, but the thing that was in the series I found really, really well handled. And yeah, as far as characters go, I do love our main character. I love Irene. I think she's like a very like pragmatic person, and that just really, really resonates with me. She's not someone who takes shit from people a lot. She's just pragmatic, and I do love it. And she does describe herself as being rather plain, but not in a way where she's insecure or anything, aside from the fact if she goes and is like confronted with this dragon who is abnormally beautiful, or this fae that is abnormally beautiful. But it's not her, she's not exactly insecure about the way she looks. She actually is, again, quite pragmatic and is like, actually, I kind of like being plain because it kind of makes my job as a spy easier, you know? And yeah, so I really love Irene. I also love our two main side characters, Vale, who is a kind of archetypical Sherlock Holmes detective. Absolutely love whatever is done with his story. And then also Kai, who is Irene's apprentice. And I don't exactly like Kai as a person, because he can be quite obnoxious and like kind of feeling like he's better than everyone else. But at the same time, I really like the way Kai and Irene's interactions are like created in the story, and I really do love their relationship, their interpersonal relationship. So yeah, that was it for this series. Would I recommend the series? Definitely, I would recommend you pick at least the first two books up, because the first book is kind of just a one-off story and you kind of have to get to the second and maybe even third book to get a bit more of the bigger picture. They're also just really fast and easy reads, so like, what's your excuse really? And yeah, I would definitely recommend them. I would also recommend them because June is Make Your Myth Taker by actually from Frolic Through Fiction, and I saw that a lot of people on Twitter were like, please help me, I need a book with fae. I do not know what book with fae I should read, and I would say you could go ahead and read this series because there might not be the fae in there that are like the spring court and summer court and so on, but there is fae in here. And yeah, so that was it for my series review. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below whether or not you're going to pick up the series. Again, my favorite book is the last one because it's set in Vienna and I'm biased like that, but I think even without being set in Vienna, I think story-wise, it's the best one. Aside from maybe the last plot that was also quite good. But yeah, with that said, all the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!